Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. Michael Reynolds stared at his son Connor in the courtroom with far more pain than anger. 17-year-old Connor sat on the witness stand, his eyes always fixed on his hands, refusing to meet his father's gaze. Connor, can you tell the court how your father's behavior affected you and your mother? Vanessa's lawyer asked, her voice full of false sympathy. Connor cleared his throat, his voice quivering slightly. He was always violent and dangerous. Mom and I live in constant fear. Michael, sitting in the defense table, felt a chill run up his spine. The 42-year-old, a veteran construction engineer who once created a safe and comfortable home for his family, is now depicted as a violent monster. Is that why your mother sought an order of protection? The attorney continued to ask. Yes, Connor replied with a nod. We no longer feel safe, especially after he installed those cameras to watch our every move. Objection, said Michael's attorney Sarah, who immediately stood up. Plaintiff has failed to offer any specific evidence of violent behavior on the part of the defendant. Judge Sandra Martinez scrutinized the young man on the witness stand, then turned to Michael. Mr. Reynolds, do you have any questions for this witness? Michael maintains a calm exterior, but the storm inside is almost uncontrollable. He glanced at his lawyer and then turned to the judge. There's only one, Your Honor. He stood up and took a cell phone out of his suit pocket. Can I play the recording of Connor's conversation with his mother last Tuesday? Connor's eyes suddenly widened and his face went pale. Vanessa froze in her seat and her lawyer immediately protested. Your Honor, this is illegally obtained evidence. No, Your Honor, Sarah countered. This is Connor's own cell phone, legally paid for by his father and managed under the bill. Under Texas law, minors have no expectation of privacy when using devices paid for by their parents. More importantly, it's key evidence in rebutting perjury. The judge thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. Permission to play. The court reporter took a breath as Michael hit the play button. We have to insist that he's violent. Vanessa's voice comes through loud and clear on the recording. And that's the only way we'll get a house and enough alimony. But Daddy never hurt us. Connor's voice sounded hesitant. What if he can prove we're lying? He can't. As long as our stories are consistent, the judge will believe us. I know your father. He cares most about his reputation. Once accused of domestic violence, he'll fall apart. We just need to hang on until the divorce is finalized, and then Greg and I can start a new life, and you can go to that college you want to go to. Did Greg's lawyer friend say this would really work? Of course, dear. Anyway, your father was too busy working to ever really care about us. He owes us. Now he will pay the price. The courtroom fell into dead silence after the recording ended. Connor kept his head down, his shoulders shaking slightly. Vanessa's expression had changed from one of confidence to one of fear. Judge Martinez's voice broke the silence with an icy tone. In view of the new evidence, this court adjourned for 1 hour. Mrs. Reynolds, I suggest you have a good talk with your lawyer. The penalty for perjury is very severe in this state. Michael sat back in his chair, feeling a hollow triumph. He won the battle, but has lost a son. 8 months ago, Michael's life seemed perfect. He and Vanessa have been married for 19 years and have a bright son, a beautiful house in a suburb of Austin, and a successful career. As an architectural engineer specializing in security system design, Michael has helped design some of the safest buildings in the city. Ironically, it was his expertise in security that led him to discover his wife's betrayal. It was Thursday, and Michael was home early to prepare their anniversary dinner. When he arrived home, he found the house empty. He texted Vanessa, but received no reply. Unusually, the home's security system showed the back door had been opened and not resecured in the afternoon. Out of professional habit, Michael checked the security cameras installed in the backyard. On the screen, he saw Vanessa walk into the backyard shed with a man. That man was none other than Greg Wilson, Connor High School's guidance counselor, and a frequent presence at their family gatherings over the past year. Michael sat in the control room of his security system, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He could have rushed out to face them immediately, but the engineer's mind kept him calm. He needed more information, needed to understand the extent and depth of this betrayal. Over the next few weeks, Michael gathered evidence. Credit card bills show Vanessa's hotel purchases during his business trips. Phone records show long conversations between her and Greg. And, even more heartbreakingly, he discovers that Connor knows about it all. One night, While Michael is pretending to be actually home from a business trip, he overhears Connor and Vanessa talking. "Can Greg come tonight?" Connor asked. "Yes, your father won't be back until Friday. We have plenty of time." "Mom, do you think that's fair to Dad?" Vanessa's laugh is cold and harsh. "Fair. Michael has put his work first over the years. He built this house and was never really here. Greg cares about me. He cares about us. And," she paused, "Greg promised to help you get into Stanford. He has contacts in the admissions office." "Really?" Connor's voice was full of excitement. "Sure. We just need to find a way to get rid of your father without losing this house and our way of life." That night, Michael stayed up all night, the pain in his heart gradually transforming into a calm determination. He was betrayed not only by his wife, but also by his son. Most unacceptably, they planned to use his reputation and fortune to fund their new life. Michael Reynolds is not a man who erupts in anger. He is a planner, a designer, someone who can see how all the moving parts fit together. If Vanessa and Connor want to play this game, he'll make sure they understand what real strategy is. In the third week after confirming Vanessa's betrayal, Michael sits in the office of his most trusted friend and attorney, Sarah Wilson. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Sarah asked, tapping her fingers on the folder on her desktop. "Once you start, there's no turning back." Michael's expression was calm and determined. "I'm pretty sure. They plan to destroy me with false domestic violence charges and make me lose everything. I'm not going to sit around and wait for that day to come." Sarah nodded, knowing her friend. Michael is always thoughtful and never reckless. If he has made a decision, it must have been well thought out. "We have their phone records, hotel receipts, and credit card bills. But the most crucial piece of evidence is Connor's cell phone recording." Sarah flipped through the file. "These recordings are legal under Texas law because you paid the cell phone bill and Connor is a minor. It will be your most powerful weapon. Is there anything else I need to know?" "Regarding Greg Wilson, I did some research." Sarah handed Michael another file. "This isn't the first time he's had an affair with a married woman. At his last school, he had a similar relationship with the principal's wife, which led to his quiet dismissal. They covered it up with a non-disclosure agreement to avoid a scandal." Michael took the file, a cold glint in his eyes. "Interesting. So would the school board be interested in that?" "Very interested, especially since he is now reaching out to underage students." Michael thought for a moment, then asked, "What's the status of Vanessa's trust fund?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. Her father Robert left her a sizable trust fund, but with strict morality clauses. If it can be shown that she has engaged in inappropriate behavior, particularly behavior that negatively impacts minors, the trustees can reevaluate the distribution of funds. "Who are the trustees?" "Her uncle, William Thompson. From what I understand, he was very close to Robert and valued the family reputation very highly." Michael nodded as a plan was forming in his mind. "I don't want Connor to be permanently injured. He's young and blinded by Vanessa and Greg's promises. But he needs to understand the consequences of betrayal. What are you going to do?" "First, we need to gather more evidence about Greg, especially his alleged relationship with the admissions office. Secondly, I would like to arrange a private meeting with William Thompson." Finally, Michael took a deep breath. "We need to prepare the divorce papers, but don't file them yet. I wanted to wait until the perfect time." Sarah watched her friend and saw the determination in his eyes. "Michael, revenge may not bring you the satisfaction you want." Michael shook his head. "It's not revenge, Sarah. It's about justice, about consequences. If there's one last lesson I can teach Connor, it's that actions must have consequences." After leaving Sarah's office, Michael begins to execute the first phase of his plan. He hires a private investigator to look into Greg Wilson's past, specifically his alleged recruiting connections. At the same time, he began secretly transferring some of his assets to a safe account to ensure that Vanessa would not be able to empty their joint assets during the divorce process. The hardest part is continuing to pretend everything is fine at home. It takes a tremendous amount of self-control to come home every night and look at Vanessa and Connor, knowing that they are conspiring against him behind his back. But Michael knew that spooking him early would only complicate his plans. He continues to gather evidence, documenting every lie, every betrayal, and waiting for the perfect time to reveal the truth. One Saturday morning in early fall, Michael announced to Vanessa that he needed to travel for a week. "Another business trip?" Vanessa asked, false disappointment in her tone. You just got back from Boston not long ago. Michael noticed the excitement hidden in her eyes, and it was obvious she was already planning to take advantage of his absence. The company has a new project in Houston that requires my personal attention. Well, she sighed. I guess Connor and I will come up with something to pass the time. I'm sure you will. Michael replied calmly, putting his luggage in the car. After leaving the house, instead of going to the airport, Michael heads to William Thompson's country house. As Vanessa's father's brother and administrator of the trust, William is a serious old-school gentleman who values family honor. William received Michael in his spacious study. Reynolds, what a surprise. Does Vanessa know you came to see me? No, William, she doesn't. Michael looked the older man straight in the eye. I'm here out of respect for you as the elder of the family to show you something you should know. William's face turned blue when he read the evidence Michael provided. The photos, those recordings. Are you sure they're real? Very sure. Greg Wilson has been having an affair with your niece for over 6 months. Worse, they used my son to convince him that Greg could help him get into Stanford if he went along with their plan. William took a sip of his whiskey, his hands shaking slightly. Robert put the trust in my hands to ensure Vanessa has a secure future, not to fund her unethical behavior. I understand this is a difficult decision for you, William, but I think you have a right to know the truth, especially given the ethics clause of the trust. William pondered for a moment, then asked, What are you going to do, Reynolds? First, I will protect my son, despite his involvement in this conspiracy. Second, I will make sure that Greg Wilson can no longer use his position to manipulate students and families. As for Vanessa, Michael paused. She needs to face the consequences of her choices. You want me to freeze her trust fund? It's not a problem. Temporarily. Make her realize the cost of betrayal, not only to me, but to the entire family. William nodded, his expression serious. I will call an emergency meeting of the Board of Trustees. At the same time, you should know that the house Robert left to Vanessa is not in the trust at all, but goes directly to her mother's family. If you want to completely cut her off financially, there are other measures that need to be taken. Michael smiled slightly. Thanks for the info, William. I've got plans accordingly. After leaving William's estate, Michael heads to a hotel in Houston. From there, he moves on to the next phase of the program. He sent an anonymous email to the school board with evidence of Greg Wilson's misconduct at his last school and photos of his relationship with Vanessa. In the meantime, he contacted an old friend in the Stanford admissions office to inquire about Greg's purported connections. As he suspects, Greg simply doesn't have the ability to influence Stanford's admissions decisions. His promise to Connor was a complete lie to control the situation. On the third day, when Greg Wilson is urgently summoned by the school board, Michael is following developments through the private investigator's real-time reports. Wilson has been temporarily suspended, the detective reported by phone, and the board is investigating allegations of inappropriate relationships with parents of multiple students. Did they mention specific names? No, they are very cautious. But my inside sources say the chairman is particularly concerned about Wilson's relationship with a 17-year-old student. Michael knew it referred to Connor. Though he didn't want his son to be caught up in a public scandal, he knew it was a necessary step. Greg needs to understand that he can't use his position to manipulate young people and destroy families. Stay on top of the situation, Michael instructed. I want to know Vanessa's reaction. Later that night, Michael got a call from Connor for the first time in weeks. Dad, Connor's voice sounded panicked. Something's wrong. The school suspended Greg, and someone turned him in. Michael, stay calm. This sounds serious. What happened? I don't know the specifics, but someone sent an email to the board saying he had an inappropriate relationship with a student's parent. Mama's been crying all day and she doesn't know what to do. I see. Michael paused. Connor, you know about Greg's relationship with your mom, right? There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment. How do you know? It doesn't matter. What matters is that you were involved in this, helped them hide it, and were even prepared to perjure yourself in court to accuse me of domestic abuse. Dad, No. Connor, now listen to me. I already know everything. Greg's promise to you about helping you get into Stanford was a lie. He has no connections in the admissions office. He took advantage of you, of your desire to go to college. You can't be sure of that, Connor argued, but the confidence was lost in his voice. I'm sure. I've checked with Stanford's admissions office. Greg Wilson's name was completely foreign to them. He cheated on you, just like he cheated on your mother. The silence on the other end of the line indicated that Connor was digesting the information. Now, I'm going to tell you what happens next, Michael continued, his voice quiet but firm. Tomorrow, I'll be home. I'll file for divorce, accusing your mother of infidelity. If she tries to fight back by claiming that I'm violent, I'll show evidence of the recording on your cell phone that proves you conspired to commit perjury. You can't do this, Connor exclaimed. I can and I must. You plan to destroy my life and take everything from me. Now you must face the consequences of your actions. But it will ruin Mom. Her choices destroyed our family, Connor. Michael's voice softened a bit. I know you love her, but she misled you and used you. Truly loving someone means wanting them to take responsibility for their actions, not cover up their mistakes. After the call ended, Michael looked out the window at the night sky. The first step has been taken and the storm is coming. But he knew that the battle had only just begun. When Michael arrives home, Vanessa is in the kitchen preparing dinner, and on the surface it's business as usual. But he noticed the tension in the corners of her eyes and the slight tremble in her fingers. You're back, she said, forcing a smile. I thought you weren't coming back until the weekend. There's been a change of plans, Michael replied calmly, setting his briefcase on the kitchen island counter. Where's Connor? Studying in his room. He's been under a lot of stress lately, with the whole college application thing. Michael nodded and removed an envelope from his briefcase. Vanessa, we need to talk. Her eyes locked on the envelope. She asked warily, about what? About you and Greg Wilson. About how you plan to use false domestic violence allegations to profit from the divorce proceedings. About how you can use our son to help you with this plan. Vanessa's face turned pale for an instant, but quickly regained her composure. I don't know what you're talking about. Are you accusing me of cheating? Not an accusation, a statement of fact. Michael opened the envelope and took out several photos. Photos of Vanessa and Greg being intimate at the hotel, in the backyard cabin, in places they thought no one would see them. I have 6 months' worth of evidence, including hotel receipts, credit card records, and, most compellingly, recordings on Connor's cell phone of you discussing how to cheat me. Vanessa's disguise completely collapsed, anger and fear mingling on her face. You spied on me. It's an invasion of privacy. No, it's protecting yourself. I'm the security systems designer, Vanessa. When I find something unusual in my own home, of course I investigate. You can't use these against me. The court will not accept illegally obtained evidence. All evidence was legally obtained. Connor's cell phone was paid for by me, and the recording was done on his own initiative, which is perfectly legal in Texas. As for the security cameras, they were installed on my property for the purpose of safety and security, not to target anyone for surveillance. Vanessa suddenly switched tactics, tears glistening in her eyes. Michael, we can talk about this. I made a mistake, I admit it. But we've been married for 19 years. Is that the end of it? Our marriage ended when you decided to lie to me and teach our son how to perjure himself. Michael's voice was calm but firm. Besides, I've already talked to William. Your trust fund has been frozen pending review. Vanessa's face turned pale at the mention of her uncle's name. You can't do that. That's the money my father left me. Your father left clear moral terms. I think he would be very disappointed in your behavior. There was a dangerous glint in Vanessa's eyes. If you do, I'll talk and tell everyone how you abused me and Connor. Your reputation will be ruined. You can try, but I have provided the police and my lawyers with enough evidence to prove that these allegations are false. In addition, Michael added, Greg Wilson has been suspended from the school and is under investigation. His promise to Connor about helping him get into Stanford was completely false. At that moment, Connor stood in the kitchen doorway with a look of pain and confusion on his face. Mom, is this true? There's no way Greg can help me get into Stanford. Vanessa turned to her son, suddenly at a loss for words. Connor, honey, it's complicated. Answer his question, Vanessa. Michael insisted. Vanessa's shoulders slumped. He knows people. He said he could write letters of recommendation. But there's no direct influence, right? Connor's voice was full of disappointment. He wants to help, really. Vanessa tries to explain, but the words sound increasingly hollow. Michael turned to Connor. I have requested an emergency hearing to discuss temporary custody and financial arrangements. Given the circumstances, I think you should continue to live here, but the final decision is in the hands of the judge. Connor looked at his father with mixed emotions in his eyes. Dad, I didn't know it would come to this. But you knew your mom was lying to me, and you chose to help her. Michael's voice held deep disappointment. Every choice has consequences, Connor. This is the last lesson I can teach you. The next day, Vanessa moved out of the house. Greg Wilson has disappeared without a trace, apparently to avoid further investigation. Connor chooses to stay at home with his father, accepting the consequences of his role in silence. The storm has descended, but the real judgment has just begun. The court hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks after Michael returned home. During this time, the atmosphere at home was heavy and awkward. Connor spends most of his time cooped up in his room, interacting with his father only when necessary. Michael, for his part, devotes himself to his work and the preparation of legal documents, trying not to imagine how his family is falling apart. The night before the hearing, Michael knocked on Connor's door. "Come in," Connor said sullenly. Michael walked into the room and saw his son sitting at the table with his textbooks spread out in front of him, but clearly distracted. "The hearing is tomorrow," Michael said, getting right to the point, "and I want to make sure you understand what's going to happen." Connor nodded, still unwilling to meet his father's eyes. "I'll be asked questions about you and Mom." "Yes, depending on your age, the judge will give weight to your opinion, especially regarding custody." Michael paused. "I want you to tell the truth, Connor. Not for me, but for yourself. Lying will ruin your life." Connor finally looked up, tears glistening in his eyes. "I've screwed up everything, haven't I?" Michael sat on the edge of the bed and felt a twinge of compassion for his son. "No, you just made a mistake. A serious mistake, but not irreparable. I thought Greg could help me get into Stanford. I thought." "You were used," Michael said softly. "I know you always dreamed of getting into Stanford, and it's my fault. I should have recognized your stress and vulnerability earlier. Greg and your mom took advantage of that." Connor wiped his eyes. "What should I do?" "Tomorrow, tell the judge the truth. No more lies, no more cover-ups. It's the only way you can start over." The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing. Vanessa's attorney tries to portray this as a case of a controlled wife trying to escape an abusive husband, but Michael's attorney, Sarah, quickly presents rebuttal evidence. The entire courtroom held its breath when Connor was called to the witness stand. Initially, he testified as previously scripted, claiming that Michael was violent. But when Michael's lawyers start asking questions, everything starts to fall apart. "Connor, you claim that your father was violent towards you and your mother. Can you describe a specific incident?" Connor hesitated, his hands shaking. I can't." "Why not?" "Because it didn't happen." Connor's voice was almost a whisper, but clearly audible in the quiet courtroom. "Dad never turned on us." Vanessa froze in her seat, and her attorney quickly stood up to protest, but the judge signaled Connor to continue. "It was Mom and Greg who told me to say that. They said it was the only way to make sure Dad gave enough money for Greg to help me get into Stanford. So your testimony was false?" "Yes." Connor looked to his father with an apologetic look in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Dad." Judge Martinez's expression turned serious. "Young man, do you realize the gravity of perjury?" "Yes, Your Honor. Considering your age and the fact that you voluntarily corrected your testimony, I will not pursue this issue. But I want you to understand that the courtroom is a place for seeking the truth, not for manipulation and lies." Then, as the evidence was presented, including Vanessa's inappropriate relationship with Greg and the recorded evidence of their plan to frame Michael, the scales of the court clearly tipped in Michael's favor. The final verdict was overwhelming. Michael was awarded primary custody and ownership of the family home. Vanessa was required to pay court costs and was warned that she would face contempt charges if she continued to spread false allegations. When Vanessa walks out of the courtroom, she doesn't look like the same confident woman. Her uncle William stood in the hallway with a serious expression. "The Board of Trustees has made a decision," he told her, no sympathy in his voice, "that under the morality clause established by your father, your trust fund will be frozen for 5 years. After that, the committee will reassess the situation." Vanessa's world completely falls apart. No money, no house, no Greg, even lost my son's trust. And it was all the result of her own choices. In the months following the hearing, life began to find a new rhythm. Connor refocused on his academics. and with Michael's support, he began to consider other college options rather than just sticking with Stanford. Michael also begins to rebuild his life. His company continues to thrive, and he has even accepted consulting work on a major national security project, the highest recognition of his expertise. One evening, while Michael was working in his study, Connor knocked on the door. "Dad, can I talk to you?" Michael put down the file. "Sure." Connor sat down, fingers twisted together nervously. "I got an email from my mom. She said she now lives in a small apartment and works part-time to make ends meet. She wants to know? She wants to know if I'd like to see her." Michael watched his son's expression carefully. "Do you want to see her?" "I don't know," Connor answered honestly. "Part of me is still mad at her for using me. But the other part, she is my mom after all." Michael took a deep breath. Despite his anger at what Vanessa did, he doesn't want Connor to carry emotional scars for the rest of his life because of his parents' conflict. "If you want to see her, I won't stop it," Michael finally said. "But I want you to remember what you've been through and protect yourself." Connor nodded, his expression serious. "I will. I won't be used again." A week later, Connor meets Vanessa at a coffee shop. When he returned, he looked thoughtful. "Well?" Michael asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. "She's changed a lot," Connor said slowly. "No makeup, wearing cheap clothes. She said she's trying to start over and has realized her mistake." "Do you believe her?" Connor thought for a moment. "I'm not sure. But I told her that if she really wanted a place in my life, she would have to prove that she had changed. No more lies, no more manipulation." Michael is a touch proud of his son's maturity. It was a wise decision. Meanwhile, Michael receives a message about Greg Wilson. After fleeing a school scandal, Greg tries to find work in another state, but his past follows him. Now, he works the night shift at a grocery store, far from the world of education and any position that would expose him to young people. As for William, he kept his word and made sure Vanessa lost control of the trust. Meanwhile, he sets up a new scholarship fund dedicated to helping talented but struggling students, a sort of ironic response to Vanessa and Greg's use of their college dreams to manipulate Connor. One day, Sarah visits with unexpected news. "Greg Wilson tried to contact you," she said, handing Michael a letter. "He wants to negotiate." Michael opens the letter and quickly schemes the contents. Greg claimed to have more evidence on Vanessa and was willing to offer a certain amount of compensation in exchange for the material. Michael sneered. "He's still playing that trick. How do you want to respond?" Sarah asked. Michael put the letter back in the envelope. "No response required. He has lost everything: career, reputation, relationships. Let him take his evidence to someone else. This story is over for me." Sarah looked at her friend and noticed the calm in his eyes. "You found peace, haven't you?" "Not calm," Michael corrected, "but acceptance. I lost the marriage I thought I had, but it was just an illusion. Now that I know the truth, no matter how painful, it's better than living a lie." A few months later, Michael received final papers from the court confirming that the divorce proceedings had been fully concluded. He sat in his backyard, watching the sun set and thinking about everything that had happened in the past year. His phone rings, and it's Connor. "Dad, I got an offer from Boston College. Full scholarship." Michael smiled and felt a surge of genuine joy. "Congratulations, son. You earned this entirely on your own. I'm proud of you." After hanging up the phone, Michael looked off into the sunset once again. Life moves on and wounds begin to heal. He lost a marriage, but won back his dignity and his son's respect. As for Vanessa, she is suffering the consequences of her choices: loneliness, financial hardship, and a loss of trust. That's the price of betrayal. It was the price Michael made sure she had to pay. The first year after his divorce was finalized, Michael's life was already starting to get back on track. His security system design company expanded in 3 states and became an industry leader. Connor is excelling at Boston College, majoring in engineering, and seems to have finally stepped out of the shadow of his family's change of heart. Meanwhile, Vanessa's situation is deteriorating. She moved into a rundown apartment on the edge of the city and kept her basics going by working as a waitress at a small coffee shop. With no degree, no work experience, and the stigma of divorce and scandal, it's nearly impossible for her to find decent work. Michael met her by chance at the shopping center one rainy Sunday afternoon. Vanessa was in front of the electronics store at the time, staring out at the laptop in the display window. She didn't notice Michael, and he had a few seconds to observe her. No longer well-groomed hair, cheap clothes, a tired face, a stark contrast to the woman he remembered as always polished. Michael could have turned away, but some impulse drove him closer. Vanessa. She turned around and was surprised to see her ex-husband standing in front of her. Michael. An awkward silence enveloped them. I hear Connor's doing well in Boston, she said eventually, trying to keep her tone even. Yes, he's doing well. It even made the dean's list last semester. She nodded, a mix of pride and pain flashing in her eyes. He hasn't contacted me in a long time. Michael wasn't surprised. Although he never prevented Connor from contacting his mother, the boy voluntarily reduced his interaction with Vanessa after the first few meetings. The wounds of betrayal are too deep for trust to be rebuilt. I should go, Vanessa said suddenly, visibly uncomfortable. I have work to do. Where do you work? Michael asked, purely out of curiosity. Busy Bean's coffee shop on the south side of town, she replied, a faint hint of shame in her voice. Jobs are hard to come by right now. Michael nodded, showing no sympathy or satisfaction. While we're together, you can go finish your degree. The words hung in the air, both a statement of fact and a wordless indictment. Vanessa had the opportunity to get an education and build a career, but she chose dependence and chose to cheat. She bit her lip. I know. I regret my choices every day. Regret doesn't change the consequences, Michael said calmly, then turned away. Back in the car, he sat for a moment, contemplating the unexpected encounter. He expected to feel some sort of satisfaction, seeing Vanessa in trouble, but the actual feelings were more mixed. Not sympathy. She fully deserves the consequences of her choices, but a sense of hollowness. Revenge didn't bring the lasting satisfaction that he thought it would. But that doesn't mean he regrets his actions. Vanessa and Greg had planned to destroy his life. He was just making sure justice was served. The next day, Michael receives an unexpected email from William Thompson, Vanessa's uncle. The email is short and to the point. He wants to meet with Michael to discuss an urgent matter regarding Vanessa. 2 days later, Michael met the elderly gentleman in William's office, looking older and more tired than the last time they had met. Thanks for coming, Reynolds. William gestured for Michael to take his seat. I know you probably don't want to get involved in anything to do with Vanessa anymore, but I have no choice. What happened? William sighed. Vanessa owes money to people he shouldn't. I'm afraid she's in serious trouble. Michael frowned. What kind of trouble? Gambling debts. It looks like Greg Wilson not only took advantage of her feelings, but also led her into the world of gambling before he was outed. She kept it from me until recently when she admitted that she owed nearly $60,000 to a man named Marcus Reed. Marcus Reed, a name not unfamiliar in Austin business circles. Ostensibly, he is a successful real estate developer, but privately, he is rumored to have ties to some of the city's unscrupulous rackets. Why didn't she ask you for help? You run her trust fund. The morality clause, remember? William shook his head. The trust fund is frozen for 5 years, and I don't have the power to unfreeze it early, even if it's an emergency. I've lent her some money privately, but it's not nearly enough. And Reed set a deadline for her, 3 weeks from now. Michael leaned back in his chair and felt a twinge of unease. Why are you telling me this? You think I'm going to help her pay her debts? William looked Michael straight in the eye. No, I know you're not obligated to. I'm telling you because of Connor. If Vanessa is unable to pay her debts, Reed may go to extreme measures against her. It would affect Connor, no matter how distant he was from her now. I've tried to negotiate with Reed, but he doesn't believe I can come up with the money. He thinks Vanessa has other resources. Like what? Like you, her ex-husband, a successful businessman. William paused. Reed started investigating your company. I'm worried he might involve Connor as a means of pressure. Michael felt a cold surge of anger. Even after the divorce, Vanessa's behavior continues to threaten his and Connor's safety. But his anger is not directed at William. The old man is clearly genuinely concerned for the well-being of his family members. I'll take care of this, Michael said finally, not for Vanessa's sake, but for Connor's safety. William nodded his head in appreciation. I thought about handling it myself, but at my age and physical condition, I'm not sure I could effectively handle someone like Reed. After leaving William's office, Michael didn't go home immediately. He drove to a downtown Austin high-rise where his former college roommate, now private investigator David Martinez, maintained a small office. Need new evidence, Michael? David asked half-jokingly when he saw him. Or is there someone else to investigate? I need all the information I can get on Marcus Reed. Michael went straight to the point, and his relationship with Vanessa Reynolds. David's expression turned serious. Reed is not a character to be messed with, Mike. He runs some dark business under the surface. That's why I need to get to know him. Vanessa owes him money, and he'll probably point the finger at Connor. I see, David nodded. Give me 48 hours. As Michael leaves the detective's office, he realizes that he is once again caught up in the mess that Vanessa has created. But this time, he would not respond passively. If Marcus Reed wants to involve him in Connor, he'll find that Michael Reynolds is no longer an easy target to manipulate. Revenge may not have brought the desired satisfaction, but it taught Michael an important lesson. In this world, you must always be prepared to protect yourself and those you love, even from threats posed by those who were once closest to you. 48 hours later, Michael was sitting in David Martinez's office, reading an exhaustive report. Marcus Reed's background is more complex and dangerous than he realizes. On the surface, he's a successful businessman, David explains, but his real estate empire is partly based on money laundering. He operated several casinos and loan sharking operations, mainly for the desperate. Once you owe him money, it's hard to get out of it. How did Vanessa get involved? David turned over another part of the file. According to my research, it was Greg Wilson who introduced her to Reed. Wilson himself owes Reed a ton of money, and it looks like he's using Vanessa to share some of that debt. They started frequenting Reed's private casino before your divorce. Michael frowned. So it's not just post-divorce. Far more than that. The records I've found show that Vanessa started gambling during the last year of your marriage, which may have started out as a thrill and evolved into a dependency. This explains why Vanessa often asked for extra household expenses during that time, and Michael never looked deeper into their use. He trusts her too much and thinks she's just taking care of family business. How serious is Reed's threat? David has a stony expression. It's serious. At least 3 people who owe him money have met with accidents in the past year. There's no evidence pointing directly to him, but the timing is too coincidental. He doesn't like it when people owe him money. Michael took a deep breath. What do I do? Pay your debts directly? No, that would just show him that you're an easy target. People like Reed get worse once they know you're willing to pay. David paused. I suggest you meet with him directly, but proceed with caution. Don't be on his turf and choose a public place. Michael nods. Can it be arranged? I'll try, but there's no guarantee he'll agree. 3 days later, Michael receives a text from David confirming that Reed has agreed to meet at an upscale downtown restaurant. Reed chose the location. It was a subtle display of power, but at least it was a public place. On the day of the meeting, Michael arrived early and chose a location with a good view. Marcus Reed showed up right on time at noon. He was younger than Michael expected, about 45, with a smart suit and elegant demeanor, more like a successful entrepreneur than a moneylender. Mr. Reynolds, Reed extended his hand. I'm curious as to what made a successful businessman want to meet me. Michael shook his hand and noticed that Reed was wearing a conspicuous sapphire ring on his finger. I'd like to discuss a mutual acquaintance, my ex-wife, Vanessa Reynolds. The smile on Reed's face is unchanged in the slightest. Ah, Vanessa. Charming lady, but a bit of a financial decision-maker when it comes to. Unfortunately, I heard she owes you money. Reed gently shook the red wine in his hand. Information travels so fast. Yes, she does have some outstanding financial obligations. How much? $63,400 plus interest. Reed answered dryly. Of course, the interest rate is increasing every week. Michael looked Reed straight in the eye. I understand that you may think you can put pressure on her through me or my son. The expression on Reed's face shifted slightly, clearly surprised at Michael's directness. Business is business, Mr. Reynolds. All I care about is getting my money back. As for how to take it back, I usually use the most efficient method. My son has nothing to do with this. There was a warning in Michael's tone. Everyone has something to do with something, Reed says gently, just in different roles. But I'm not a barbarian. I prefer a civilized solution. Michael clenched his fists, but maintained a superficial calm. I came here to propose a solution. A young ear. I'm not going to pay Vanessa's debts for her. Michael made it clear. That's her own responsibility. But I'll make sure she pays it back on time and doesn't let things escalate to the point where other people need to be involved. Reed raised an eyebrow. What's the guarantee? She has a trust fund that is currently frozen. I can arrange to unfreeze a portion of the funds under certain conditions, specifically for debt repayment. Not all of it, but enough to cover the principal. Reed thought for a moment. What about interest? We can negotiate a reasonable number instead of your predatory, usurious interest rates. Mr. Reynolds, Reed put down his glass. You seem to misunderstand the nature of our relationship. I'm not a bank, and I'm not obligated to renegotiate terms. And you seem to have misinterpreted my message. Michael kept his cool. I'm not asking. I'm telling you that this is the best you can get. If you choose to apply pressure by threatening my son or me, I guarantee you'll face much more serious problems than debt collection. There was a dangerous glint in Reed's eyes. That sounds like a threat. This is a statement of fact. I have partners in national security programs, including a number of agencies with a particular interest in money laundering and illegal gambling activities. Michael removed a flash drive from his pocket and placed it on the table. Here is a partial record of your financial activities for the past 6 months. I'm sure you don't want that information to fall into certain hands. Reed's expression froze as he stared at the flash drive as if it were a viper. You're playing a dangerous game, Reynolds. No, it's not a game. It's business, like you said. Michael pushed the flash drive toward Reed. This is just the copy. Consider my offer. Take a program that guarantees you'll recoup your principal, or take a chance on facing people who are very interested in your business model. The cacophony of the restaurant seemed to disappear, and the tension between the two men was almost palpable. Eventually, Reed picks up the flash drive and puts it in his pocket. You have 3 days to provide a concrete repayment plan, he said, his voice low. And if I'm satisfied, we'll pretend this conversation never happened. I'll contact you in 3 days. Michael finally relaxed his tense shoulders as Reed left the restaurant. He knew he had just taken a huge risk, but he had no choice. Protecting Connor is his top priority, even if it means having to get involved in Vanessa's mess again. The following day, Michael contacted the trust's attorney and William to discuss the possibility of unfreezing some of the funds under special circumstances. After difficult negotiations, they came to a complicated arrangement. The trust would pay the principal of the debt directly to Reed, but with strict conditions. The money would be deducted from Vanessa's future trust income and the freeze would be extended. On the 3rd day, Michael sent Reed a detailed repayment plan through secure channels. A few hours later, he received a short reply. Accepted. The crisis seems to have lifted, but Michael knows it's not the end. He needs to make sure Vanessa understands that this is the last time she'll get help. There must be an end line to her behavior. That night, Michael drove to Vanessa's apartment. It's a dilapidated building in a less desirable part of town. He rang the doorbell and waited a few minutes before hearing footsteps. When the door opens, Vanessa looks even more haggard than the last time we met. She looked at Michael in surprise. We need to talk, he said without politeness, getting straight to the point, about Marcus Reed. Vanessa's face instantly turned pale as she wordlessly let the door open, allowing Michael to enter her small, cluttered apartment. William told you, she finally said, frustration in her voice. Yes, you should have told me before things got out of hand, especially considering Reed could have threatened Connor. Vanessa sat in a worn chair, her shoulders slumped. I didn't think it would come to this. It started out as a few small bets, and then it got out of hand. Michael picked up on her words. Like your relationship with Greg, like your plot to frame me. One bad decision after another, all made by you. She didn't retort, just nodded wearily. I've arranged for the debt to be paid, Michael continued. Not for you, but to protect Connor. But this is the last time. Vanessa looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. I don't know how to thank you. No thanks needed. This money will be deducted from your trust fund, and the freeze period will be extended. You will suffer the consequences of this decision for a much longer period of time. I understand. Michael stood up, ready to leave. I hope this is the last time we need to talk like this. If anything else happens that threatens Connor, the consequences will be far worse than they are now. As he walked toward the door, Vanessa suddenly spoke. Do you hate me, Michael? He stopped, but didn't turn around. I don't hate you, Vanessa, but I don't forgive you either. Your choices destroyed our family and betrayed our trust. Now you must bear the full consequences of those choices. After leaving the apartment, Michael sat in his car and breathed deeply. For once, he didn't feel hollow or unsatisfied. Instead, he felt a calm firmness. He has protected himself and Connor while making sure Vanessa continues to face the consequences of her actions. It's not about revenge, it's about justice, on ensuring that everyone is accountable for their choices. Maybe that's the real victory. Fall creeps in and Connor returns to Boston to begin his junior year. Michael's company continues to grow and was recently awarded a large government contract to design security systems for multiple federal buildings. Life gradually found a new rhythm and meaning. Marcus Reed's threat has been lifted, and Vanessa seems to understand boundaries and has made no further attempts to contact Michael. Occasionally, Connor mentions brief phone calls with his mother, but these exchanges apparently remain tense and superficial. One Friday evening, Michael was enjoying a glass of whiskey at home, relaxing and reading an engineering journal, when the doorbell suddenly rang. This visitor was totally unexpected considering the late hour. Through the security camera, Michael saw an unfamiliar young woman standing in the doorway. She was around her early 20s and looked around nervously, looking a little uneasy. Michael asked through the access control system, "Is there anything I can do to help, Mr. Reynolds?" The woman asked, her voice shaking a little. "I'm Jessica Wilson, Greg Wilson's daughter." The name was like a punch in the gut. Michael never heard that Greg had a daughter. During their relationship, Greg never mentioned family. After a moment's hesitation, Michael opened the door. Jessica Wilson has blue eyes similar to her father's, but looks more tired than her age. She clutched a paper bag tightly. "Come in," Michael said politely, though inwardly wary. Jessica walked into the living room, but refused to sit down. "I won't take up too much of your time. I know what happened between you and my father. Then you should also know that he is not welcome in this family." "I understand," she nodded. "I'm not here to defend him. In fact, he and I haven't spoken in years. My mother took me away from him when I was 12. That explains why Greg never mentioned his family. So what are you here for?" Jessica took a deep breath and handed Michael the bag of papers. "My father died last month. Late-stage liver cancer. In the last days of his life, he gave this to me to pass on to you and Vanessa Reynolds. He said it was part of the atonement." Michael took the paper bag and felt a strange mixture of emotions. He never wished Greg dead, even though the man had nearly destroyed his life. "I'm sorry to hear that," he told Jessica sincerely. "No need to apologize. He's not a good father, and from what you've been through, not a good person either." Jessica's voice was calm but firm, but at the end, he seemed genuinely sorry for what he'd done. "That bag contains his confession and some papers I thought you'd be interested in." Michael opened the pouch and found a handwritten letter inside, along with several legal documents and bank statements. "I should go," Jessica said. "The address is on those papers if you have any questions. But honestly, I want this to be the end. My father has done enough damage." When Jessica leaves, Michael sits down to peruse the file. Greg's letter is a joint confession to him and Vanessa, admitting how he systematically approached their family and took advantage of Connor's college dreams and Vanessa's insecurities. But most shocking of all are the bank statements. They show that Greg transferred a sizable amount of money into an offshore account after he was fired from the school, and that the money was, according to him, borrowed from Marcus Reed for Vanessa. In other words, Vanessa doesn't know the whole truth. She did participate in gambling, but those huge debts to Reed were largely borrowed by Greg in her name, without her authorization, and then kept for himself. Michael picked up the phone, hesitated for a moment, then dialed Sarah's number. "I need legal advice," he said, explaining briefly what had just happened. These documents could change the nature of the debt Vanessa owes Reed. Technically, this could constitute identity theft and fraud. "Send it to me and see," Sarah replied. "But if true, it does change things. Reed could face legal problems, and Vanessa could be entitled to compensation." After hanging up, Michael considers whether he should contact Vanessa. This information could greatly affect her situation. But before taking any action, he needed to confirm the authenticity of the documents. The next day, Michael contacted David Martinez and asked him to verify the authenticity of Greg Wilson's death and these documents. "Give me a few days," David promised. On Monday afternoon, David came to Michael's office with the results. "The paperwork is real," he confirms, and Wilson did pass away last month from liver cancer. Those bank transfer records are real too. I investigated Reed's activities further and found that he did have a pattern, finding vulnerable people and then using them as debt brokers. Wilson is clearly one of them. Michael pondered the information. Does that change anything? I mean, Vanessa's still involved, and she's still choosing to betray me and use Connor. Sure, David agreed. But it does add a layer of complexity to the whole story. Reed may have broken the law, and he faces serious consequences if this evidence is made public. Michael nodded and decided to take action. He first contacted Sarah and asked her to prepare the legal documents. Then he sent Vanessa a short message. We need to talk. About Greg and Reed. Important new information. Later that night, Vanessa arrives at Michael's house. She looked even more haggard, but there was a more alert and determined look in her eyes. What did you find? She asked directly. Michael handed her the paper bag. Greg left it before he died. It seems he lied to us about more than just the Stanford connection. As Vanessa reads the document, her expression shifts from confusion to shock and finally to anger. He borrowed money in my name? All this debt. Most of it isn't mine. It would appear, Michael kept his tone neutral, that while you did participate in the gambling, those large loans appear to have been made by Greg without authorization and then kept for himself. Vanessa threw the papers on the table, her hands trembling. I'm such an idiot. He totally manipulated me, didn't he? First with feelings, then Connor's college dreams, and now this. Michael didn't deny it. The problem is that these documents could change the legal relationship between you and Reed. Sarah thinks you may have grounds to ask for partial cancellation of the debt or even for compensation. Vanessa looked up at Michael with a gleam of disbelief in her eyes. You're willing to help me fight Reed? Why? After everything I've done to you. It's not for you, Michael made clear. It's for justice. Reed is a predator, exploiting weakness and fear. He threatened Connor's safety. If these documents can make him pay, it's worth a try. Vanessa is silent for a moment, then nods. I owe you so much, Michael. Not just monetarily. If there's anything I can do. One thing, Michael looked her straight in the eye. Stop the self-pity. You make choices, and those choices have consequences. Even though Greg manipulated you, you still chose to betray. Now, face those consequences and rebuild your life. If not for your own sake, at least for Connor's. There was no malice in his words, only calm truth. Vanessa nodded slowly, tears finally slipping from her eyes. You're right. I'll do it. Regardless of the outcome of this lawsuit with Reed, I will continue to suffer the consequences of my choices. And just like that, Michael once again finds himself on the same side as his ex-wife, albeit for completely different reasons. This is not reconciliation, not forgiveness, but a united front against a common enemy. When Vanessa left, Michael knew the story wasn't over. But perhaps the wheels of justice are turning on another man who should face the consequences. Marcus Reed. Preparing to fight Marcus Reed is as complicated as it is dangerous. Sarah suggests they need more evidence than just Greg Wilson's confession and bank records. They needed to prove that Reed had knowledge of and participated in this fraudulent lending scheme. Michael again turned to David Martinez, who utilized a variety of sources to begin an in-depth investigation into Reed's business activities. Meanwhile, Michael contacted several former clients with connections at the FBI and politely mentioned situations that might be of interest. After 3 weeks of intense preparation, they held a strategy session in Sarah's office. Vanessa was invited to attend as well, and although the atmosphere was awkward, everyone maintained a professional demeanor. We have enough evidence to prove that Reed knowingly and actively participated in this fraud, Sarah explained, displaying the documents David had gathered, not only against Vanessa, but in at least 5 other cases, in an almost identical pattern. He finds vulnerable people, usually couples with strained relationships or individuals in financial distress, and manipulates them through middlemen like Greg. Is the FBI interested in this? Michael asked. Very interested, David replied, especially when I mentioned that Reed might be involved in some high-level money laundering. But they need an inside informant, someone willing to testify. All eyes turned to Vanessa. You want me to go undercover? She asked incredulously. Not exactly, Sarah explains, but you can wear a recording device and meet with Reed to try to get him to admit to the program. You're a ready-made victim and have good reason to ask for an interview. Vanessa looks both scared and hesitant. What if he finds out? You all said he was dangerous. It will be monitored, David assured, and it will be in a public place. Risks exist, but they are manageable. Michael watched Vanessa's reaction. Though his feelings for her had long since changed, he didn't want to put her in unnecessary danger. It has to be your own decision, he said finally. No one will force you. Vanessa was silent for a long time, then looked up with a new determination in her eyes. I'll do it. Not just to get out of debt, but because it's the right thing to do. Greg used me. Reed used me, and I've tried to use others. It's time to break the cycle. The plan is set for a week from now. Vanessa will contact Reed stating that she would like to discuss the debt arrangement modification privately. The meeting place was chosen to be on the terrace of an upscale restaurant, which allowed for easy surveillance but provided enough privacy. FBI agents worked closely with them, providing sophisticated recording equipment and real-time surveillance. Sarah drafted a list of questions to guide Vanessa on how to steer the key topics and try to get Reed to acknowledge his partnership with Greg. The night before the meeting, Michael receives an unexpected call from Vanessa. I'm scared, she admitted outright, her voice quivering. What if I fail? What if Reed finds out? Michael was silent for a moment, contemplating how to respond. Even though he no longer loves Vanessa, he doesn't want her to get hurt. You won't fail, he said finally. You're stronger than you think. Think of it as an opportunity, not only to settle your debt, but also to prove that you can face those who try to control you. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Thank you, Michael. Despite everything, you're still willing to help me. I'm helping you because it's the right thing to do, and to make sure Reed doesn't threaten anyone again, including Connor. His answers were honest and direct, with no false warmth. On the day of the meeting, everything was ready. Vanessa was dressed in simple but modest clothes and wore special recording equipment. Michael and David were in a nearby surveillance van, with FBI agents watching the whole thing. Reed arrived on time, well-dressed as always. He looked curious but wary of the meeting. Mrs. Reynolds, he greeted politely. Or what would you prefer I call you? Vanessa's just fine, she replied, her voice more subdued than Michael had expected. So, Vanessa, what did you want to see me about? Your ex-husband has arranged a repayment plan. Yes, but I recently learned some information that may change our nature of the agreement. Reed's expression hasn't changed, but his posture is slightly taut. Is that right? What message? About Greg Wilson. I know he borrowed most of the money, pretended it was from me, and then kept it for himself. Reed let out a soft chuckle. It sounds like a story made up by a desperate man. It's not made up, Vanessa said firmly, removing a copy of the document. It's Greg's bank records showing that he transferred that money into his account. More importantly, I'm sure you knew that all along. Reed glanced at the file, then turned his gaze back to Vanessa. You're accusing me of being involved in fraud. I'm just stating the facts. You and Greg have a pattern, don't you? Find vulnerable people, put them in debt through a middleman, and then apply pressure. I'm just wondering how much of the so-called debt is real. In the surveillance van, the agents exchanged approving glances. Vanessa was calmer and more direct than anyone expected. Reed puts down his glass and his expression turns dangerous. You should be careful what you accuse, Vanessa. The world is not kind to those who are too curious. Is it a threat? She asked directly. Just a suggestion. If you want to revisit the terms of the debt, we can talk. But if you try to challenge the legitimacy of the debt, then our conversation is over. Vanessa took a deep breath and then dropped the key question. Have you talked to Greg Wilson about my finances? Before he introduced us. The question seemed to surprise Reed slightly. He paused for a few seconds, probably considering ways to answer. Of course, he finally replied, trying to keep his tone light. Greg and I have been business partners for years. He mentions your trust fund. He mentions your marriage in question. He thinks you may need extra money to secure the future. So you've been planning this for a while? Before I even started gambling. Reed's expression grew cautious as he realized he might be talking too much. I don't know what you're implying. I think you know, Vanessa insisted, that you and Greg are partners. He introduces potential clients. You provide the money, and then you share the proceeds. And these clients often don't know the whole truth. Reed's eyes turned cold and his voice lowered. I suggest you stop talking in this direction, Vanessa, for your own good. How many others? Vanessa presses on. How many others like me have been manipulated by you too? Reed stood up abruptly. This meeting is over. If you are going to challenge the validity of the debt, then we will address it through other channels. Just as he turned to leave, Vanessa uttered the key sentence she had prepared in advance. I have Greg's statement and bank records from before he died. I'm sure the FBI would be very interested in that. Reed stopped and turned slowly. His expression changed completely, a dangerous glint in his eyes. You should be very careful, Vanessa. Some games are dangerous, especially for those who don't know the rules. This isn't a game, Marcus. It's about justice. Reed bent down closer to Vanessa, his voice almost a whisper but loud enough for the recording equipment to catch. Do you think Greg is the only one who knows how this system works? I have other partners in many places. If you think you can threaten me, you really should reconsider. It was almost a direct threat, enough for FBI agents to take action. The surveillance van door opened, and several agents quickly walked towards the restaurant. When Reed saw them approaching, a flash of surprise, followed by clarity, crossed his face. He turned to Vanessa, anger burning in his eyes. Recording? That's smart. But it's not over, Vanessa. It's far from over. Agents quickly intervened and took Reed aside for questioning. Meanwhile, the other agents took Vanessa away from the scene and escorted her to safety. In the surveillance van, Michael watched the whole thing with a strange sense of satisfaction. Not because of Vanessa's performance, although she did exceed everyone's expectations, but because another exploiter is facing the consequences he deserves. Sarah turned to Michael with admiration in her eyes. She's doing great. It was much better than we expected. Michael nods. Yes, she did. The days that followed were characterized by rapid developments. Based on Vanessa's testimony and Greg's documents, along with evidence gathered from other victims, the FBI filed multiple charges against Reed, including fraud, racketeering, and money laundering. Searches of his office and residence uncovered additional evidence revealing a complex network of financial crimes. A month later, Michael received a call from Sarah. Significant progress has been made in the case, she exclaimed. Reed has agreed to a plea bargain and could face at least 15 years in prison. As part of the deal, he has to compensate all the victims, including Vanessa. That's good news, Michael replied. There's more, Sarah continued. And thanks to Vanessa's cooperation, the trust board agreed to unfreeze some of the funds early. She won't be as rich as she used to be, but enough to start over. Michael felt a mixture of emotions. He never wanted Vanessa to fall into permanent poverty, but wasn't sure she'd really learned her lesson either. What is she going to do? He asked. As far as I know, she plans to return to school to finish her degree. She mentioned wanting to become a counselor to help those in similar situations. Michael didn't respond. People often say they want change, but real change takes time and action to prove. A few days later, he received an email from Vanessa. Unlike past attempts, this email is short and frank. Michael, I want to thank you for your help in the Reed case. I know you're not doing this for me, but for justice and to protect Connor. I won't ask for your forgiveness, because my behavior is unforgivable. But I want you to know that I'm trying to rebuild my life and not be the same person who is at the mercy of others. I've applied to psychology programs in hopes of eventually helping others avoid the mistakes I've made. I won't intrude on your life anymore, but hopefully one day Connor will be able to trust me again, even just a little bit. Thanks again for everything. Vanessa. Michael closed the email and didn't reply immediately. He wasn't sure if he should reply. The cycle of vengeance seems to be over, replaced by a calm acceptance. Vanessa is suffering the consequences of her choices. Reed will pay for his crimes, and Michael and Connor are moving forward. Maybe that's true justice. Not retaliation, but making sure everyone takes responsibility for their actions and then moving on with their lives. A year later, life presents a new balance. Michael's company continues to prosper and has now expanded to 5 states as an industry leader in security system design. Connor successfully completed his studies at Boston College and has been accepted into the graduate engineering program at MIT, all through his own hard work and talent. Marcus Reed's trial has concluded with the expected result: 17 years in prison with no possibility of parole and millions of dollars in fines and restitution. His criminal network was completely dismantled, and the victims he had once manipulated finally received some measure of justice. As for Vanessa, according to Connor's occasional mentions, she did return to school as planned and is currently pursuing a degree in counseling. She moves to a small town to start a new journey away from her past life and memories. At Connor's graduation, Michael inevitably sees Vanessa again. They maintain a polite but distant relationship, sharing pride in their son's accomplishments, but no longer trying to rebuild a relationship that has been broken. At the family dinner after the ceremony, Connor makes a surprising suggestion. "Daddy, I want Mommy to come along." He watched Michael's reaction. "It's just dinner, to celebrate." Michael considered it for a moment. "If that's what you want, I have no problem with that. But don't expect too much." Connor nodded in understanding. "I know what happened between you can't be fixed. But she is really trying to change and has been learning all year how to live on her own and no longer rely on others or manipulate them." "People will say they're changing," Michael commented. "Real change takes time and consistent action to prove." "I know," Connor agreed, "but I want to give her a chance. It's not about forgiving the past. It's about seeing if she's actually moving on." The restaurant was chosen in an upscale, but not ostentatious place in the center of town, offering plenty of privacy and comfort. Vanessa arrived on time, dressed in plain but neat clothes, looking healthier and calmer than she has in years. "Thanks for inviting me," she said to Connor, then nodded politely to Michael. "Nice to meet you, Michael." "Likewise," he replied, keeping a polite distance. Dinner went surprisingly well. The conversation centered around Connor's accomplishments and future plans, avoiding topics that could have caused tension. Occasionally, when Connor talked about his classes or experiences, Michael noticed a twinkle of pride and a hint of sadness in Vanessa's eyes, the sadness of missing part of his son's formative years. Before dessert is served, Vanessa removes a small box from her bag and hands it to Connor. "Happy graduation," she said, sincerity in her voice. "I know it's nothing compared to what you deserve, but it has a special meaning." Connor opened the box to find a well-made watch inside. "It was Grandpa's," Vanessa explained, "and my father's. William gave it to me before he died, saying it should be passed on to the next generation of the family. I can't think of anyone who deserves it more than you." Connor was clearly moved. "Thanks, Mom. It's really special." Michael observed the scene and felt a mixture of emotions. Vanessa does seem to be trying to do the right thing, albeit in a simple and limited way. She no longer asks for forgiveness or sympathy, but simply tries to make up for some of the damage as she is able. At the end of dinner, Connor excuses himself to go to the restroom, leaving Michael and Vanessa briefly alone. "He's grown up," Vanessa said softly, "and gotten so smart and kind." "You're doing a great job, Michael." To his own credit, Michael replied, "He's been through a lot, but chose to learn from it rather than be defined by it." Vanessa nods. "I want you to know that I have no illusions that we can go back in time or make up for my mistakes. But I'm really trying to be a better person, not for your forgiveness, but because it's the right thing to do." Michael studied her expression and saw a sincerity he hadn't seen in her eyes in a long time. "I hope you succeed, Vanessa. Not for me, but for yourself and Connor." "Thank you," she replied calmly. "That means a lot." Connor returns to the table and they finish dinner. Outside, as they prepare to part, Connor hugs his mother and then turns to his father. "I promised some friends I'd go celebrate," he said, "and won't be back too late." "Be safe," Michael instructed, watching his son leave. Michael and Vanessa were the only ones left standing in the night, a strange calmness enveloping them. "I should go," Vanessa said, "and congratulate Connor again. He really is a remarkable young man." "Yes, indeed." As Vanessa turned to get ready to leave, she paused. "You know, after all that, I think I finally realized something." "What?" "Everyone gets what they really deserve in the end." She looked Michael straight in the eye. "You deserve success and Connor's love. I deserve to lose it all, but maybe, if I keep trying, I have a chance to gain some self-respect." Michael didn't respond immediately. Eventually, he said, "I hope so, Vanessa. For yourself." There they parted, Michael going in one direction, Vanessa in another, just as their lives had gone their separate ways. There are no dramatic reconciliations, no sudden forgiveness, only a calm acceptance of the truth that some mistakes are too big to be repaired, that some choices must always have consequences. Back at home, Michael poured a glass of whiskey and stood in the backyard staring at the stars. He remembered the storms of the past few years, the pain of betrayal, the satisfaction of revenge, and now, a strange calm. Not because Vanessa has been punished, but because justice has finally been done. She paid for her choices, just as everyone should be held accountable for their actions. Michael's cell phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was a text from Connor. "Thanks for everything tonight, Dad. Love you." Simple words bring warmth. Despite everything, Connor has grown into a strong, smart, and caring young man. Maybe that's the real victory, not watching Vanessa fall, but making sure her behavior didn't destroy their son. Michael finished his last sip of whiskey and turned off the backyard lights. Life moves on, and new chapters wait to be written. The price of betrayal has been paid, the lesson has been learned, and it's time to move on completely. Not through forgiveness or reconciliation, but through acceptance. Some broken things can never be repaired, but that doesn't mean something new and stronger can't be built from the pieces. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.